Hey, what's up, everybody? It's cold, wet in Houston, but Santa's already made a delivery in the form of Michael Brantley. What's next for the Astros? We'll talk about it next on episode 3 of Stone Cold Stros, and we can't wait to see what's next for this team. Welcome into Stone Cold Stros. I'm Brandon Strange. I'm joined, as always, by SportsMap.com editor Josh Jordan, senior contributor Charlie Polillo. Guys, welcome them in. You can catch them. I need to add their tags in. At Josh Jordan 975 on Twitter, at Polillo for Charlie Polillo on Twitter. Guys, welcome in.
Sure glad we resisted doing this outside.
Yes. We thought we were going to do our first one outdoors. I don't know about you guys. I'm really excited to talk about an old familiar face rejoining the team, add a little bit of stability to the team. Before we get into the conversation, we want to allow some people to get in so that they can interact on the show. Josh, while we're waiting for everybody in our audience to join in, can you give us some housekeeping?
Let's do it, guys. As of today, we are on Apple, Audio Boom, Google, iHeart, Spotify, Stitcher, and YouTube. Did I miss anything there? Just search for Stone Cold Stros. You will find us. If we're not on the preferred platform you like, drop us a comment. We'll see what we can do about that. And once you found us, please, guys, hit subscribe. Please like the videos on YouTube. That really helps us with the algorithm. Early reviews have been good, so we'll try and keep it going. Literally thousands of other podcasts that you guys could be consuming. So we thank you for listening to ours. And for those streaming along with this live, be sure to comment in the chat. If you want to drop Charlie a question, any of us a question, go for it. That's something we like to do during the show, guys. We'll answer those near the end of the podcast. So, all right, let's get going.
Good deal. Thank you, Josh. And I guess some other bit of housekeeping too is we will not have a show next week for the holidays. And then the following week, I think we're going to do a Tuesday. We haven't firmed that up yet, but I think that's the schedule right now. No show next week, show Tuesday and the following week, the week of New Year's. So again, I echo what Josh says. Just want to thank everybody for choosing Stone Cold Stros. Guys, we have some really great news. Uncle Mike's back, 1 year, $12 million plus some incentive. I feel somewhat conflicted a little bit. On the one hand, it's always happy to have Brantley back. He is a stabilizing force. It remains to be seen at what level he's going to play. I see a lot of people have him penciled in to the lineup already. I don't know that I'm as confident we'll see him. If we do, there's a question about where does he play? Where does he hit in this lineup? Jeremy Pena he made a season last season of hitting in that 2-hole, and on the back of that position and some clutch hitting was able to capture ALCS MVP and World Series MVP. And I think a lot of reason is because he was protected by Yordan Alvarez behind him. He knew he was going to get some pitches to hit. Now we know that when Brantley's healthy, that's typically the spot we see Uncle Mike hit in. So I don't know. I'm personally in favor of seeing Jeremy Pena stay in the 2-hole. I know Dusty Baker last season lobbied to make sure that Jeremy Pena stayed in the 2-hole. So that's my personal preference. We're not going to see, we'll see how Dusty handles it. But if Brantley, who's a very, thorough, steady hitter, if he's hitting down in the bottom of the order, is that the worst thing in the world?
Well, we could look at it in part as a platoon of where guys hit in the lineup. Now, I don't think Brantley is going to be a 145-game player, even if he's totally healthy, the shoulder's shipshape. He turns 36 in May. He is a professional hitter. His power has flickered, like my camera seems to be. It's a good thing I'm hearing more from my voice than my face. But, Brantley, 370 on base percentage last year, never lower than 362 on base percentage in his 4 seasons with the Astros. You want traffic as much as you can get when you get to Yordan in the 3 spot, Bregman in the 4 spot, Tucker in the 5 spot, Abreu in the 6 spot. So the most important thing for the guys at the top of the lineup is to get on base. A lot of variables with this. Right? Brantley's on base percentage was 370 and about 250 plate appearances, whatever it was before his season ended. Jeremy Pena, 299, which is not good. That's not high in the lineup stuff. But you break it down. He finished with a flourish. So if that's the platform, obviously he's not going to be a full-time player the way he was in the LCS and the World Series. But let's say he graduates to a 330 on base percentage guy, which isn't great for a 1 or 2 hitter, but it plays with Pena's power, which Brantley does not have much anymore. Dusty, as you noted, he was wedded, and it was part of the click. You're probably a short timer dynamic that keep Pena in the 2. Damn the analytics and the on base percentage. We're like 93-8 when the guy's batting in the 2 hole. I'm keeping him in the 2 hole. I do think there's an old school element. You'd also like to have speed at the top of the lineup. Michael Brantley at this stage of his career basically doesn't have any, whereas Pena, one of the fastest guys that they have. How do you weigh with no more shifts? Altuve gets on first base, first baseman holding him. You can't jam up the right side for Michael Brantley. A lot of space for him to pull a ball through the hole. Jeremy Pena, like most hitters, more a pull hitter than an opposite field hitter. So that's one for Brantley to take advantage if Altuve's on first. I would think Brantley projects to play 30, 40 games in the outfield, another 50, 60 games maybe as the designated hitter. And Brantley's had some ebb and flow, but generally speaking, he's not great against left-handed pitching. And of course, he's not a center field option. So I'm good with bringing back Brantley. Just the 1 year and $12 million was the ballpark. I threw a dart at the board on a sports map column a few weeks ago. But you don't have that left-handed hitting complement to Chas McCormick in center field unless you're willing to put Brantley in right field some. Right, this is non-throwing shoulder, the one that's messed up. But if Brantley can play some right field still when Yordan is the left, does that open up? Well, select games. Kyle Tucker can play some center field if you want to sit McCormick against some of the tougher right-handed pitching. So I think Brantley is here as just another competent bat, knock on wood, health willing. And let's throw in professional hitter. Hey, you want a pinch hit for Maldonado? 7th inning, 6th inning, 5th inning as a game situation dictates. Right, the Astros bench, as most benches are, pretty thin. Right, you're looking at David Hensley, maybe Jake Myers, maybe Maurice Dubon. Well, if you have Michael Brantley, you have a choice A coming off the bench any game he's not in the starting lineup.
Well, I'll throw my hat in the ring. I want Pena in the 2 spot. I was a big, before Dusty even did it last year on a lot of sports map videos, I wanted him there. When Dusty kept putting Yuli out there and kind of defending why he was using Yuli in that spot, which it was working, but Yuli was just kind of slapping some balls through the infield, where with Pena, you brought it up, Charlie, he's got power. He can go up there and hunt fastballs with Yordan behind him. If he wants to hunt some, hanging sliders, he did plenty of that too, since, that's the book on him, is throw him the off speed, but you can't throw them all ones in the dirt. He kind of figured that out and stopped swinging at those. So you have to throw him over the plate, and he crushed it. I'm not messing with it. I'd put Michael Brantley near the bottom, just kind of keep the thing going, keep getting hits, keep getting guys on base. I'm not messing with Pena in that spot. And the other thing is speed too, Charlie, which you brought up. I want to see somebody that can really run at the top of that lineup. I've seen some people saying like, hey, why don't you put Brantley in the 3 spot, and leave Pena at 2 and then move Yordan to 4. And then everybody goes, down a step.
You don't push down your best hitters.
Yeah. I don't like it because you're getting less at bats for your best hitter. So, of course, Twitter, you're going to hear all kinds of opinions on what they should do. I think they just leave it the way it is. Put Brantley down at the bottom. I think that's a good spot for him. And we'll see how it goes. The thing that concerned me is I pulled up his splits. Remember, he was really struggling against left-handed pitching 2 years ago. So in 2021 against left-handed pitching, hit 219 with a 5.75 OPS. Awful, really, compared to, the 363 with a 9.24 OPS. I mean, a completely different hitter facing lefties and righties. But he remedied that a little bit last year, whereas he actually hit 10 points higher batting average-wise against left-handed pitching. The OPS was still better at 810 against righties. So I'm curious to see if that was just a blip for Michael Brantley that 1 year, or if that's something that's going to come back and haunt the Astros this season.
If he was center field capable, which he's not, I mean, he's never been a center fielder, certainly not at this phase of his career, you're going to ask him to play some out there. But offensively, he'd be a hand-in-glove complement to Chas McCormick, who destroyed left-handed pitching. Does Chas still have some growth? He's 27 years old already, so he's not a young phenom. And just one other thought on Pena in the 2-hole. I think Jeremy Pena would be emotionally devastated. And why are you kicking me to the lineup curb after what I did in the postseason? If you went Brantley 2 and Pena 7. But look, the future of the Astros, obviously, Jeremy Pena is much more integral to it. His growth opportunity in the 2-hole, I would want to find out more about that and give him a chance to continue to evolve than just default to Michael Brantley. You know, there's this expression or sports saying, cliche, that you don't lose your job because of injury. Baloney. Go all the way back to Wally Pipp, Lou Gehrig. Guy has a headache, never gets his job back 15 years later. Brantley batting 7th, maybe a little reminiscent of, for my money, the best offense, at least relative to the league they were in. The 2017 Astros of this 6-year dynastic era, the World Series winning team in 17. That was the best offense. Josh Reddick, left-handed hitting outfielder, routinely hit 7th in that lineup. Josh Reddick's career year, the length you had in that lineup with also Brian McCann down at the bottom. So Brantley in that 7 spot also is another guy who gets on base at a high frequency. If he's down there at the bottom, that can help you turn over that batting order. Even if you're going to have McCormick or Maldonado making outs to end an inning, you get through them that you're turning over to Altuve more quickly from the end of the order. That's another positive. So I would give Pena every opportunity in that 2-hole. And, you know, again, with the rules changes, the bases are going to be a little bit bigger. It's going to be a little bit easier to steal bases. Shorter distance than 90 feet by 3-4 inches, and baseball is a game of inches. Pickoff throws, right? You can only make 2 on a runner and a given hitter. Otherwise, the third one is a balk unless you pick them off. I think it's just going to be a free-for-all and a stolen base fest everywhere. But if speed kills, it's going to have a little more opportunity to kill. That plays into Jeremy Pena's hand. Top of the lineup as well. Hedge that, though. If Altuve makes an out, Pena gets on first base. I don't know how often you want to tell Jeremy Pena, try to steal a base, risk getting thrown out while Yordan Alvarez is at the plate. Let Yordan have that right side to hit at when there's only one other infielder on that right side. It's going to jack up Yordan's average this year.
We didn't really talk about the contract size. And before we do that, I want to add on to something you guys said. I think it's where he hits is probably going to be fluid during the season because we know Dusty likes to play around with those lineups. And so there's probably going to be some experimentation, which maybe he is down lower in the Pena is lower in the lineup or Brantley's lower in the lineup. So there may be some movement just to kind of see how guys react to certain situations. I would be surprised if it doesn't settle into Pena hitting in the 2-hole, just because, again, it really does optimize his performance, allows him to be protected by Yordan behind him, gives him more quality pitches to see. Brantley doesn't need that protection. He's just a good quality hitter with a good eye. And how many situations did we get into last year where guys were on base? There was a little bit of a rally and then it got to Yuli. And this is not to pick on Yuli, but it just was the reality of what his regular season was last year, where you had guys on base. There was a little bit of a rally going on and then Yuli came up. And you just didn't get, or like Mauricio Dubon came up, like the bottom of the lineup would come up, and it would be a rally killer. I think it'd be such a luxury, even if he's hitting well, to have a quality, consistent hitter at the bottom of your lineup to help, turn it around and get back into the top of the order, and then get Altuve back on. So I think that's a good option to have down there. And if you're a team that is as deep as the Astros are, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for luxury items, and that's a good one to have. Speaking of luxuries, it's luxuries to not have to overpay for a good quality hitter. We talked about and kind of speculated what his contract would be. He ends up with 12. It was 1 year, $12 million. He's 4 and more in incentives, I believe. Mm-hmm. So 16 in total. It would, if he hits all of his incentives, then it matches what he's been getting previously, which was 16 a year. I don't know about you guys. I think that's a pretty good deal, just considering the way the market has seemingly adjusted now.
Well, the outfield names that had been bandied about with the Astros in recent weeks, Brandon Nimmo, who would have been a spectacular fit. Leadoff hitter, speed guy, high on base guy, or if you wanted to slot him 2 behind Altuve, that's fine too. But terrific on base guy, platoon with McCormick, but 8 years, $162 million. I don't know what his second best offer was, but Daddy Warbucks with the Mets just said, all right, let's just trump it by far and stay here. Andrew Benintendi, 5 years, $75 million. Sounds like it's on the cheap. Given what the market did, at least at the top end this offseason. So the White Sox add him. If Brantley's healthy, Benintendi's a better age play as a guy who's 29, 30 as opposed to 35 turning 36. But he's really no better an offensive player than Brantley, maybe a little more power. in Chicago, south side of Chicago, better hitter's park than Kansas City, where he was last year, but not as good as Fenway, where he had his opportunities to start his career. Michael Conforto hasn't found work yet. I was never big on him. He didn't play at all last year and wasn't very good when he did in 2021. So the short-term play on Brantley, and if it turns out the shoulder gives out or Father Time just catches up with him, 1 year, $12 million. It's a very minimal sunk cost if you have to move on. And if he thrives, it works out well for both parties. You could revisit a similar scenario for 2024.
Yeah, that's got to be what Crane's thinking, right? It's let's just try and run this back one more time with Brantley. All the guys love him on the team. The risk is low as far as long term, like you said. That if it doesn't work out, you move on next year and you grab somebody else. Quickly on the lineup thing that just kind of occurred to me. We know how Dusty likes to go righty lefty back and forth. So Brantley behind Abreu might make some sense just for that purpose right there. Just going righty lefty. But we'll see. I don't know. Dusty also, he's a big, I love my veterans kind of guy. So he might give it to Brantley for that purpose. But no, I love the deal. Benintendi was the one I kind of was really interested in. When I saw they got him for $15 million per year, you know, that sounded reasonable to me. That's about what you're paying Brantley. It's just you're on the hook for so many more years if it goes sideways. And we know the Astros, they don't like the 5 and 6 year deals, you know, unless you're Yordan Alvarez or somebody like that. So great move for the Astros. You know, it'll be interesting to see. Is Yuli going to be somebody they look at next? And how many guys is it too many to run it back with? If it's in a utility role, I wouldn't mind seeing Yuli sign back up.
Well, as you flesh out the roster, right, we have a feel for what the lineup is going to be, a tweak here, a tweak there, who bats where, but we know 1 through 9 what they'll probably be running out March 31st against the White Sox to start the season. On the bench, you're going to have a backup catcher or a complimentary catcher or a catcher starter in waiting, however they go there. Aledmus Diaz out. David Hensley seems to be odds on for that role. That leaves you 2 spots. If you're carrying 13 pitchers, which was the Astros' norm over the run of the regular season, you only have 4 guys on your bench. Your backup catcher, Hensley, is your primary backup infielder. Jake Myers and Mauricio Dubon, unless you're going to bring back Yuli for one of those spots, or maybe there's another center field capable player who's just better than Dubon, certainly offensively. But it's possible the Astros have the composition of their roster to start 2023. And if that's the case, that's just fine. It's good to be greedy, right? Gordon Gekko is right, at least in terms of stacking up talent on a baseball team. So, the Astros could add one more name value player, but what they have is certainly a way above average offense that you're not thinking, against this team or that team, that they're grossly inferior from Toronto to the Yankees or anyone else you want to put in the conversation.
So last week, right as we were finishing the podcast, the Christian Vasquez news hit. So for the people who were listening on the audio podcast, we were able to put a little blurb in front of that. And it really wasn't relevant to the conversation necessarily, but we haven't talked about it here yet. I think it was a very reasonable contract. I think he chose not to go here, not to come back to Houston because I think playing time. I think Maldi's still going to have a stranglehold on a lot of the opportunities to catch here because of his built-in relationship with the pitchers here, and they have an affinity towards Maldi. So I liked that contract. The Astros have been in the market for catcher, though, seemingly since the winter meetings. And we know that they were at least in talks, or they had a conversation with Contreras because Dusty confirmed that. We don't know how much of the other conversations were real or how substantive they were, because it's hard to know. There's so many agents that are feeding information to the media to say, the Astros are inquiring about this person, or they have conversations with this. You just don't even know how much is just them calling, going, how
John
much?
Heyman. John Heyman.
Yeah. And on a side note, I almost feel dread. I felt better the fact that John Heyman until the very last moment didn't connect Brantley to the Astros, because he's been wrong every time so far with everyone he's connected to the Astros, but that's neither here nor there. Arson judge anyone? But so Michael Schwab says that the Astros are connected to Tucker Barnhart, and they've been connected to seemingly every free agent or tradable catcher so far this postseason, or off season, I should say. And we've talked about a little bit here. What does that mean? I've said their interest in catcher, I think, says something about where they feel their prospects, either Diaz or Lee, are at in their readiness to take the helm. But I've kind of come full circle on it. I almost wondered now if there's a preservation of trade bait with one or both of these guys, just because, we know James Click said last season when they traded for Vasquez, they said this was the ultimate insurance policy for Maldi, just in case Maldi got hurt. Well, little did we know Maldi was actually hurt. He was playing with that broken hand, but they said it was the ultimate insurance policy. So it makes sense to bring in a veteran if you think that maybe one of these guys, one of your prospects, are going to be trade or pieces of trade bait during the season for some sort of mid-season move. So I'll throw it to you guys. What do you guys think?
How much do they want Maldonado to play in 2023? He made 110 starts, which is a pretty significant workload in this era for all but the elite starting catchers. To me, that's too much. Right? He's 36, turning 37. He's an offensive millstone, career high in home runs aside, but he doesn't project to improve much at this stage of his career, unless the hernia was really impacting his offense. And I think Maldonado's overall offensive career suggests it does not. Let some youth be served. Now, Yainer Diaz or Corey Lee, you don't want them on the major league roster making a start and a half per week where you're getting 7-8 plate appearances as opposed to full-time run in the minors. But at some point, you need to throw them in the water and see if they're going to sink or swim. Diaz is 24. Lee may have turned 24 already. Yainer Diaz has destroyed minor league pitching each rung on the ladder. Split last season between AA Corpus and AAA Sugarland. He's never had, other than his first few at-bats in rookie ball. But 4 straight seasons now in the minors, he's had an OPS of at least 865 or 870. I'm not saying that will carry over directly to the major leagues, but he has real pedigree. He's relatively young to catching. He didn't become a full-time catcher until maybe 2019. So maybe there are some rough edges and you're worrying if defending the running game takes on increased importance. But he's earned the opportunity to get some run. Corey Lee was their first-round draft choice, hit with power at Sugarland. Didn't hit for much average, doesn't walk a lot, strikes out by the boatload. But defensively, huge arm, better than Maldonado. Moves better behind the plate than Maldonado, who led the American League in pass balls last season. The plan should be, since you didn't swing big on Contreras, fine with that. Didn't have the prospect capital or willingness to put in the best that you had to trade for Sean Murphy. Okay with that. Well, 2024, your starting catcher is Yainer Diaz or Corey Lee, unless they both flame as prospects or Martin starts chugging from the fountain of youth and really couldn't hit when he was young. So the trade consideration that you're talking about, Brandon, I like the concept behind that. Tucker Barnhart should excite nobody. He is a left-handed hitter. Right. So is Jason Castro. Yeah. They didn't play them as a platoon. And if you can't hit righties, you can't hit lefties. What's the value in a platoon? But he is a good receiver. He's won a couple of gold gloves, a la Maldonado. But Tucker Barnhart was actually worse offensively in 2022 than was Martin Maldonado. But with a collection of pitchers, a couple of guys who are still young, I don't think Christian Javier needs to be wet nursed. Or Luis Garcia or Urquidy's not young. He's 28, needs to be wet nursed. Framber Valdez needs to be wet nursed. So if you have an inexperienced major league catcher handling him for half his starts, so what? The guy who intrigues me is Diaz, because he has just slaughtered the baseball, each rung on the ladder, rookie ball, A ball, AA, AAA, Well, what's next? Maybe he turns out to be one of those guys who's what they call a 4A hitter. Yeah, he crushes it in the minors, but then when it comes to the majors, it just doesn't work. I would really like to find out. He's also a guy who can play a little bit of first base days. You want a designated hit Jose Abreu some, probably at 36 years old. Don't want him playing the field 150 games at this stage of his career. So I understand the thinking, and they're trying to thread the needle a little bit of win now. So Barnhart is a savvy, quality receiver, complement to Maldonado. But I would want Martin really starting no more than half the games. And, you don't want to put it all on what happens in spring training, but let Diaz and Lee have kind of a catch-off to see who makes the squad, right? The Astros rarely carry 3 receivers in the regular season. But the guy I would really like to find out about is Yainer Diaz, because I'm not suggesting if you just let him play, well, you have the next Mike Piazza of hitting catchers in your lineup. But the last real good Astros hitting catcher was basically nobody. Alan Ashby had a couple nice years once he found his stroke. On the other hand, though, right, the signature of the 2022 Astros World Series champions was their pitching. Someone has to make a few outs. So Maldonado, whoever else is catching, if they're batting ninth, okay. If you're getting poor production out of a position where not all that many major league teams get quality offensive production. So it's not a make this call or else. I like to see really good prospects pushed and challenged. That is not rushing them, certainly not when they're 24 years old, right? Jeremy Pena was a 24-year-old rookie. But I would want to go Diaz or Lee. Neither guy, because they're not super young, has this incredible trade value that I would be saying, I need to hold on to. So I have my trade chip as one, and then the other is my Astros catcher of the future. That said, I'm not going to be holding my nose and screaming if they go with Tucker Barnhart.
I'm with Charlie. I want to see Diaz. I'm looking at Baseball America right here. The Astros' current prospects, they have him at the top right behind Hunter Brown. And I think we all expect him to be on the big league roster this year. And then another thought of maybe why they didn't give that long-term deal to an outfielder. The top prospects the Astros do have are outfielders: Drew Gilbert, Jacob Melton, Pedro Leon. So if they're thinking they have an outfielder, coming up here in the next year or two, that's probably why they didn't want to commit a 5-year deal to one of these free agent outfielders. If they think those are their best prospects and they play outfield, well, there you go. If Brantley doesn't work out, maybe by next year, Pedro Leon's ready to go, or one of these other guys. So that makes sense to me. But yeah, take a shot with Diaz, man. He's got some pop. See what happens. I'm tired of all these backups on other teams. There's no upside there. Give somebody else a shot. If Diaz doesn't work out, you still got Lee. He's a good defensive catcher, and he's just going to accidentally, I think, hit better than Maldonado. So that's the route I would go.
I think it's we're talking about this and microanalyzing because that's what we're doing. We're doing an Astros podcast, but the reality is the Astros were able to fade Maldi's bat last season. They won the second most games in their team's history and finished with a chip. So, and if we're being honest, Maldi was very serviceable in the postseason and came up with some big clutch hits, if not big clutch hit by pitches. Who
has a 9-hole hitter who's a good offensive player?
Yeah,
you're a 9-hole hitter.
Exactly.
So you're contributing in other areas, and obviously Maldi does that in spades. But I don't think it should give you a Supreme Court justice status that you have the job until you retire or die.
No, but clearly you asked, when you first started talking, you said, how much do they really plan on playing Maldi? Apparently enough to scare off Christian Vasquez, because this was never a real option for him. I don't know if you saw the story where the Twins had offered him the deal, and before he accepted, he called back to Boston to see, hey, this is what they're offering. You guys in on it? And Boston said, no, we're good, and let him walk. Of course, man, on a side note, if anyone's feeling FOMO right now about anything you feel like you're missing out on for the Astros, look at Boston and you'll feel much, much better. But the point is that Christian Vasquez didn't call back the Astros and say, here's what the offer is from Minnesota. He called Boston because he felt like Boston was the more realistic opportunity. So the fact was that was a very reasonable contract, and he knew he wasn't going to get a lot of playing time. here, and that just didn't. He didn't want to do that. So I find that troubling a little bit, only because I just really like Christian Vasquez. I feel like he's a guy who the moment's never too big for him. He's never trying to do too much at the plate. He does exactly what the team needs him. He's not afraid to be patient, hit a ball the other way, super disciplined hitter, especially in those big moments. We've seen him now have critical hits in 2 playoff runs, in the 2018 run with Boston and in the 2022 run with the Astros. Guy he just always seems to be in the right position at the right time and takes the right approach at the right at bat. And there's something to be said for that. All the things that we're talking about with Diaz, and I'm the same way. I'm really excited about what Janer brings to the table, because we haven't really seen it. But he hit, I think he played, and I'm going to pull this number out of my rear, but I think he got 3 or 4 pitch hits last season. And I think the first 2 or 3, he just was swinging out of his heels at basically everything and would not take a pitch. And then Dusty sat him for, I think, 2 weeks or something like that. And then in the last week of the season, one of the final couple of games, he got a pitch hit opportunity, belts one into the gap for a double. So clearly the guy's, like you said, if he's not a 4A player, if he's not a Jason Lane or a Jose Siri, as a more contemporary reference, if he's not a 4A player and really is a major league hitter, then they really have something there. But to your other point, it really depends on how much they prioritize defense, because they really do tend to do that. And I don't know how his defense is going to translate to the big league level, because like you said, it's not something he's been doing the entire time.
Yeah, it would be obviously a notable trade down defensively, and we're talking about Diaz here. For those in the Vasquez camp, there's no meaningful data that suggests that Maldonado was a much better receiver than was Vasquez. And you look at the Astros pitching stats in the postseason when Vasquez was behind the plate, something like 32 consecutive scoreless innings. Throwing out base runners, neither was very good, frankly, in terms of percentage. But, hey, it could be much, 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 much worse. You could be a Twins fan saying, all right, we have that former Astro locked up for 3 years. And it's Christian Vasquez, not Carlos Correa. So as the Astros try to still max out the presence of this era, but also with an eye to the future. And again, we're not talking about young phenom level, 19, 20 years old, where, okay, let the stew simmer a little bit. You can play a full year at AAA if you wanted to do that. Nah, get him up. I'm an OJT guy. Put him in the lineup. See if he can hit. But if you're going to carry him, you should be starting 3 games per week. Pretty much a job split for my taste. And that would likely go for Corey Lee as well. But Corey Lee, I think, has rougher edges offensively. Diaz, I'm pretty confident, would be a plus offensive player as a catcher from the jump. There's only one way to find out.
Yeah. They got to give him some playing time. We'll see what happens. But what do we think about, you talked about a little earlier, Charlie, Michael Brantley. We've heard Bagwell talk about he'd like to see Jordan in left field 45 to 50% of the time.
And Jordan started 42% of his games in left field. So that's not like some big leap in playing time.
Okay.
I'll go with 58%. I hope Jordan plays more, especially if it's he or Brantley out there. At this point, Jordan's the better defender. Huge arm. I mean, left field at Minute Maid Park, from the warning track, he can throw guys out. Load management we associate more in the NBA than Major League Baseball. But Jordan, I mean, he's such a big guy that long term you'll always be mindful of weight bearing those knees given the multiple surgeries. But it's not like Bagwell's suggesting an undue workload for Jordan to play half the games in left field. I'd be a little bit more ambitious than that myself.
And it seems like Dusty was, Dusty and Baggy kind of had some different numbers in their mind. I think Dusty saw him in left field a little bit more. I'm curious to see, how that takes place. I guess now we just kind of have to wait with Brantley. I think we were told, March, we'd have a better idea where he's at with that shoulder. clearly the Astros and the medical staff, Crane, felt pretty good about it, or you're not giving him this much money with that much risk attached. And I brought this up on the podcast last time. I'd be a little hesitant with shoulder injuries after I saw what happened to Jake Myers. And Brandon brought up a good point too. Some of that might be confidence, not just the shoulder with him coming back. So it'll be interesting to see. I hope Brantley's good to go. I want him in the lineup pretty much every day, whether it's DH or left field, as long as he's healthy and, performing at a decent level.
One other thing with Brantley, the contract is pending passing the physical. We'll presume we'll get there, but that's not playability passing the physical. There's no rush. Without Michael Brantley, if they'd signed one of us as the extra outfielder type, they're still going to be good. They were third in the American League in runs scored last year, with Brantley not playing half a season. So if he needs extended spring training, where you take it slow, and turns out he's not capable of really playing until May or June, that's all right. Once he's capable of playing, he's at least a reasonable facsimile of the Michael Brantley we've seen around here over the last 4 years and change.
Yeah, and it's not a McCullers thing. We're not seeing him till that late in the season.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I would much rather, again, if you need perspective on this contract, I'd much rather pay what you paid for Brantley versus what Cody Bellinger got with the Cubs. You talked about one of us playing the outfield. I mean, the batting average is pretty comparable, I think, to one of us playing the outfield. But we do need to move on to one of the other notable free agents that was on the move last week, and that's Carlos Rodon, who ended up landing with New York. New York was able to land him and make him solidify their rotation that much more. A lot of talk around the interwebs and on Twitter and on the Yes Network, comparing the two lineups or the two rotations, because, I mean, it makes sense because the Astros have been on top in the AL for 6 years, and that's the litmus test. That's the line you have to, the benchmark that you have to aim for. New York's aiming for that. They believe they're one step closer to reaching that benchmark with Carlos Rodon. So they now have a rotation of Garrett Cole, Rodon, Nestor Cortez, Luis Severino, Frankie Montas. So a lot of people in New York speculating that rotation is pretty close, if not good enough, to battle toe-to-toe with the Astros. Obviously the Astros rotation takes a big hit, losing the reigning Cy Young winner, but Astros are still very deep in the starting rotation. Where do you guys see the Yankees now stacking up against the Astros?
Blurred myself out there. Thought I was going lightheaded, and now it's something with this camera. Look, it's comparable, but you go man for man, it is comparable, but the ellipsis ... is gigantic. The age factor, youth overwhelmingly favors the Astros. I mean, Garrett Cole's good, a horse. He's been spectacularly durable. He's also turning 32 years old, and his ERA has been over 3 since joining the Yankees. Fromber was 2.48 last season. Javier was better than that. Cortez was an all-star. Color me a little bit. Do it again or something in the same realm. Severino never stays healthy. Frankie Montas, arm question. He was a disaster after he joined the Yankees in the trade. So in theory, if everything tumbles into place for the Yankees, yeah, that is a loaded rotation. But they have age and health question marks, and Carlos Rodon doubles down on those. Not that 30's ancient by any stretch, but the last 2 seasons, he's been great. ERA sub 3, better than that. Struck out 237 batters, I think it was, this past season, in about 160 innings. But over the last 2 seasons, he's thrown 310 innings, give or take combined. Biggest workload he's ever shouldered in back-to-back years. The 2 years prior to the last 2 years, he threw a total of 42 or so innings. 2020 was a short year. Well, he threw 7 innings. The year before that, his arm fell off. He threw 34 innings. So 6 years, 182 mil. That's $27 million per. 6 years with Rodon's health. The Yankees kind of had no choice. They had, after keeping Judge, we touched upon this specifically, they make their team better. That just maintained. If they were looking to close the gap on the Astros, and especially for October baseball, Rodon's pitched like an ace for 2 years now. But will he answer the bell in October? And how often will he answer the bell over the 6 months getting to October? And those 6 months over 6 years? Maybe the Yankees are thinking, geez, if we can get 3-4 healthy years, it's sunk cost on the back end where the Yankees will just go buy the next best pitcher on the board. So, they were rebuffed as Verlander went across town to the Mets. They go twice as long for less than one more season's worth of money. So it's all about the health. But as a general rule, younger or in their prime players are better bets on the health front. And that is clearly advantage Astros, with, of course, the exception of McCullers.
Yeah, for me, I read a piece in the New York Post that Hal Steinbrenner met with Aaron Judge before he signed, and Judge had some demands, if you will, that if he was going to come back to New York, he wanted to see them make some moves. I think the Yankees might see part of what they're paying Rodon is what they didn't have to pay to get Aaron Judge back, because we know Aaron Judge got some offers of more than the Yankees offered him, but he came back, and I think he wanted them to use some of that money on pitching, which they did. So I found that interesting. I hadn't heard that. I think I read that in the New York Post this morning. So that makes sense to me. A lot of times when guys, maybe you don't have to pay me top of the market, but use that money to improve the baseball team. And clearly they needed pitching if they want to get past Houston. So, that's the avenue they elected to go down. But we shall see. I'm with you, Charlie. It's a lot of injuries with those Yankee guys. They've missed a lot of time over their career outside of Cole. So a lot of unknown there. They're older as well, like you mentioned. I'd side with the Astros guys because at the top, I think they're better too. I'd take Fromber over Garrett Cole. I think Cole's ERA was like 3.5 this year. Fromber to me looks like a more dominant pitcher. And Cole gave up the most home runs in the American League last year. That's not great. So I'm going to side with my Astros.
If we were having a 1-year draft, strictly for 2023, and the pitcher pool is Astros and Yankees. I think Fromber would go 1, actually, to a majority of teams. Cole would still draw a lot of support. Rodon would draw some, but can he be healthy for a 3rd straight season as a major leaguer? Never done it before. And then, of course, Javier hasn't done it as a full season guy in a rotation. He just happened to be unbelievable once he was in that rotation. But no one, never say no one, but Domingo Germán, another name we didn't mention. Frankie Montas off the way his second half of 2022 went. Luis Severino off his last 3-4 years. No one's taken any of those guys over, I don't think, Garcia, who wasn't great. He's a high 3s ERA, but durable and still has the upside of being a mid-20s guy. And then, it's a big if, and I would not make book on Lance McCullers throwing 180 innings, but what if he gives you 150? Well, then no one's taking Severino over McCullers. No one's taking Germán or Montas over McCullers. And then, what if Hunter Brown is going to be, let's say, Justin Verlander, very, very, very junior, just a good rookie starter. The Yankees at this point really have no material starting pitching prospects. Now, after Hunter Brown, it's very thin for the Astros at this point. Well, the Astros have a bunch of guys in their mid-20s in their rotation now. So they're not forced to spend $40 million per year or $30 million per year on a starting pitcher, or they have these huge, huge Swiss cheese holes in their rotation. The Yankees not in that spot now. The Yankees, of course, fortunate to have that unlimited resource funding mechanism. But when you look at what Steve Cohen did across town with the Mets, I mean, once the Yankees whiffed on other guys, no way could they stop with keeping Judge. So Rodon's a great get for them. ... if he's going to be the durable workhorse that he was for the Giants in 2022.
Charlie, you said Fromber gets picked first in a draft in a pool of these two pitching staffs. I find that interesting because I think we pay attention to this a little bit closer than I think maybe the national audience does. Cole's still a big name. I just find Fromber criminally underrated right now by the majority of the MLB viewership. And I know we don't.
I just think he was lost in the wake of Verlander. Right? Verlander
Sure.
was just winning the Cy Young, 1.75 ERA, all that legend. Fromber, a 2.48 ERA, would have been the best starter on 3/4 of the other major league teams, maybe 24, 25. He was better than any of the Yankee starters. And Cole had a good year. Cortez had a fantastic year. And, oh, by the way, Fromber, very durable. You can't be more consistent than breaking the record for consecutive quality starts. Dubious definition of quality. Nevertheless, no one did it 26 times in a row wherever Fromber finished off. So the spotlight will be his. I presume he's the Astros opening day starter when March rolls around. But I think and another, he keeps the ball in the ballpark. Right. I'm not saying Garrett Cole gives up 40 home runs, but Garrett Cole can give it up.
Yeah.
Fromber just pounding that hard sinker. What do you give up, like 12 home runs in the entire season?
Cole gave up 30 something.
So. Yeah, he had an elite season. He was so good that if there's a little bit of regression, I don't think we have a mean yet for Fromber because he hasn't pitched enough seasons. But if Fromber's ERA goes from 2.48 to 2.88 and he's thrown 180 innings again, well, that's solid number one stuff when you're backed by a good defense and a really good lineup. And maybe it's Fromber Valdez this year who can make a run at winning 20 games.
Are we ready to say that the Fromber that we saw last year is who Fromber is? Because you mentioned it. That was a really breakout season for him. We'd seen flashes of that previously. He's never put a season consistently together the way he did last year. And going into the playoffs, his postseason performance was solid. He was the ace for this team in the postseason. And when you couldn't count on Garrett Cole, Fromber came up and was lights out and really dominated the opponent bats. Do we think this is who he is? And if that is the case, you talked about the advantage the Astros have in signing very team-friendly contracts. Should the Astros be looking to lock up Fromber? If that's who they think this is, get ahead of it. Don't let him get to free agency and maybe sign him to a free team-friendly deal.
He's a guy that always easy to spend $30 million per year of someone else's money.
Yeah.
But, Fromber, a late arriver, a late bloomer. He's closer to 30 now than 25, I believe, meaning closer to his 28th birthday than his 27th. But if you do a 5-year deal, and you never know when a guy's going to break down, but I think Fromber throws freely and easily. His mechanics are solid. Unless say his weight was to get out of hand or something like that. I think his career trajectory is pretty solidly predictable, unless he forgets how to sink the ball. He's not a guy. I mean, I think some of these radar guns are juiced these days. He's not a guy who's going to, certainly not consistently, hit 96, 97. If he loses a mile or two off his fastball, I don't think it's debilitating to his game that he gets guys to chase, boring in with that hard stuff down to right-handed hitters. And the marketplace has gone wacko. Mm-hmm. He's 3 years away. So again, no rush if you're the Astros, but if almost as a gesture of goodwill, you say, okay, we'll give you 2 more years at $50 million total for those 2 years. And there's your generations of Valdez financial security, whatever happens with your arm. He's a guy, if you did it with Lance McCullers and his track record of health, why would you not do it with Fromber Valdez?
I think the reason would be, what was it, $85 million for the total contract for McCullers? I think for Fromber, you're going to have to do something like Rodon, like $150, $160 million at close to
3 years
million.
From free agency. I wouldn't go that rich if I'm the Astros.
Yeah. But I mean, if he gets to free agency, it's going to be in that ballpark, or actually it'll probably be more. Just because, especially if Fromber keeps pitching like he's been pitching, then he's going to be, even more highly touted. So that's a lot of money, a lot of years to give to a starting pitcher when you could just kind of wait 3 years and just keep paying kind of what you're paying until he hits free agency. It's tough. We talked a little bit before the podcast. I think we'd like to see Fromber do it one more year, right? If Fromber can do it one more year, for me, it was Fromber had to do it in the postseason, and he did that this year. They won the World Series. He was a key part of that. If he has another year like this, he's proven everything he needs to prove to me.
I agree. Generally more injury risk with pitchers. Framber will be a 30-year-old, getting ready to turn 31 years old as a free agent 3 years from now. So if you go 2 years beyond that, you're not going to his late 30s. But 2 years from now, is he the Astros' best starting pitcher, or is it Christian Javier? And if you throw down a template of, okay, we took care of Framber at X, well, then is Javier X multiplied by whatever. Yordan, 6 years, 115 million from the Astros standpoint seems like a song now. And if you were going to extend Kyle Tucker, I think already would probably take more than that.
Yeah, that's not happening again.
So if you were to lock in your presumptive number one, at least the new incumbent number one, Framber Valdez, maybe that's the pitcher that Jim Crane would say, okay, we'll go to 5 years because we think we're getting very favorable team terms. You're still filthy, filthy rich. No pity party that, the Astros screwed over Yordan. No, 6 years, $115 million worth of security. But I don't think the Astros would or should go Rodon level for Framber at this stage, 3 years from free agency.
So that's the front end of the lineup or the rotation. The back end of the rotation, I think, is interesting too, because last week on Sports Map, John and Lance were talking about this topic, and I wanted to run it past you because I thought, Charlie, you would be, and Josh, we talked a little bit behind the scenes, so I have a spoiler on where you fall out on this. But the question posed was, what's Josh, maybe you can help me a little bit with the mechanics of the question, but it was, who's more important to the back end of the rotation that they kind of step up? Is it going to be Luis Garcia or Lance McCullers? Because both of those are kind of in critical spots. Garcia can be a very meaningful inning eater for you. Lance McCullers has the health questions. And so the question is, who's more important out of those two guys to step up? And I guess we're at the 50-minute mark, so let me allow that to be our bottom line question of this episode.
Over 162 games put me down in the Garcia column. It's about heft. It's about workload. The guy who's going to make 27, 28, 30 starts, as opposed to someone who, if you were offered 20 starts from Lance McCullers, but he's healthy the last day of the regular season, you'd probably take that. In October, Lance has that ability to dominate. He's been very up and down, frankly, in the postseason. If you're only as good as your last start, yeesh. Whereas I don't think Luis Garcia has that electric level stuff. Now, maybe there's a door still that he can walk through and march on to a higher level. But regular season, I'm Garcia because to me, he's the obviously better choice to give you back end of the rotation innings of pretty good quality and certainly quantity, which funnels into bullpen use and all that over 6 months' time.
Yeah, that's where I came out on it too. I thought it was Garcia. Who knows what he could turn into? He can get the ball up to 97. He's a big guy. It can be an easy mid-90s for him. Nasty breaking stuff. I think it'll only get better. And coming in that Seattle game and pitching that many innings and just that was impressive to me. I love Lance McCullers, great player. I think we got a good deal with him. It's just, it's always the health with Lance. And we also posed the question, do you still trust Lance, after, a rough postseason and, giving up record home runs and the pitch tipping and all that stuff? I'm not too worried. I think they'll figure that out by the season rolls around.
Yeah, and my personal answer to that, I think Garcia is more important just because there seems to be more upside there with McCullers. McCullers is who McCullers is, and he's been consistently inconsistent over his career. When he's on, he's lights out, and when he's not, well, game 3 of the World Series happens. So you just have to see, but. Now we want to take some questions from the audience. So guys, if you're in the chat and you want to ask some questions, this is the time to do it. I'm going to start with Alberts, who posed this question. What do you think about the Astros going after Profar?
Well, I would think off the season he had with the Padres, he could find better playing time opportunity than here. I guess you could shoehorn him into center field, but I think of him as more a corner outfielder. Once upon a time, a super duper star prospect with the Texas Rangers, never panned out. He's bounced around. Look, if you're willing to spend the money, and I'll take Jurickson Profar over Mauricio Dubon. Jake Myers, I'll say I'm cautiously pessimistic. And Profar would give you that positional versatility that, you can stick him, maybe not shortstop at this point, but if you needed him in a pinch to play a little first base, second base, those who would want Yuli back for, Profar could give you, and then probably a little bit more because he's an infielder, outfielder.
And Profar is a Scott Boras client. In my opinion, we've seen a lot of Scott Boras clients tied to the Astros. I wonder how legitimate that report is.
Well, especially as we talked about the Astros name being used, and we know Scott Boras is a fan of using the Astros name, and rumors, just because we saw how the Correa thing played out, and then we now know what the reality was with the Correa talks. Ray says, this is my question. What happens if two pitchers go down? Who do we have to replace them just in case? And I think you hit on a little bit of that, which was Hunter Brown. I think he's going to be one of your guys that can slide in either in a 6-man rotation or can be an injury replacement in a 5-man rotation. Who do you see them tapping to round out the lineup in the case of catastrophic injuries?
Yeah, that's where the loss of Verlander carries a little bit of because you can't count on Forrest Whitley. If he goes to spring and impresses and stays healthy and gets off to a good start in Sugarland, I guess he'd be that proverbial next man up, because the Astros are fairly thin in terms of major league ready starting pitchers. I don't think there is another candidate. Is there a wild card that maybe you start trying to stretch out a guy like Seth Martinez and see if he could take to a starter's role where, if it's a temp or fill-in guy before you go explore the trade market, that you're asking, give me 4 innings, and then the depth of our bullpen, it's not quite a bullpen game, but that, get us to the 4th, 5th inning and we can work our way through that, especially if you're bulwark starters, starting with Fromber, regularly getting you into the 6th and 7th inning. So yeah, that's a little bit of a warning flare with Verlander gone, who was pretty much money to give you at least 6 every time out. But if your problem is who's your 7th best starting pitcher, you're in generally good shape relative to your peers.
Yeah, Bielak is still around. He could be a guy that can give you 4 or 5 innings in a jam.
Yeah, and I think the backup your bullpen game is the most logical answer there, and it would be I think a combination of either Martinez or Bielak or one of those guys who can be innings eaters for you. But yeah, you're right. That is a legitimate concern. But if they go down 2 starters, well, then they have legitimate worries anyway. So
name a team that wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's exactly right. Well, guys, that's going to be it for this week's episode of Stone Cold Stros. We appreciate everybody tuning in and interacting and commenting along. Again, next week, no episode. Week after, I think we're going to push back to Tuesday. So we'll firm that up. But if you're watching us on YouTube now, please hit like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're listening to us on one of your preferred audio platforms, give us a 5-star rating and a positive review should you feel inclined. We do appreciate any kind of push and rub you give us on that end. Guys, thank you so much. Josh, Charlie, thanks a lot for joining me this week. We'll talk to you next week. Go Stros.
Happy holidays.